Welcome, everyone, to this journey of learning, self-discovery, and growth in the Enneagram Global Summit 2021. In this session, we're being joined by three highly respected coaches and coaching trainers to explore the impact of the Enneagram on the coaching field and in working with individuals, organizations, and in training coaches. Our first speaker or faculty is going to be Roxanne Howe-Murphy. Roxanne integrated the Enneagram and coaching in her pioneering 2007 book, Deep Coaching, using the Enneagram as a catalyst for profound change. The 15th anniversary edition is to be released in 2022. Her award-winning 2020 book, Deep Living with the Enneagram, led to the nonprofit Deep Living Lab and fueled her current writing and teaching on the body of work focusing on interconnectedness called Ennea Crossings. Welcome, Roxanne. Honored that you're here with us today.
Thank you, Jessica, and I love being here. I'm looking forward to our time together.
We're also introducing Mario Sikora. Mario is a global leadership development consultant and executive coach who helps leaders at all levels of multinational corporations achieve breakthrough results. He features the Enneagram in all of his programs and has worked with clients on 5 continents. Mario, I'm so glad you're bringing your expertise here to this session.
Thanks, Jessica. It's great to be with you again. Thanks for having me.
We also have James Flaherty. Now, James is the founder of New Ventures West and the author of Coaching, Evoking Excellence in Others, which is widely recognized as a seminal text in the field of coach education. James developed the methodology known as integral coaching by integrating recent discoveries in linguistics, developmental psychology, 20th century philosophy, and biology. James, really, really happy to have you on this session today.
Thank you, Jess. I think I have to update my bio to include 21st century philosophy. Philosophy goes on. And I also think that I should just listen to Mario and Roxanne. These two people sound like they're going to bring us a lot. Anyway, thank you for inviting me and including me with this amazing body of people.
You are entirely welcome. So we're going to start with the individual coaching, how to really use the Enneagram to work with individual healing, growth, development, life goals, and probably spiritual awakening as well. And we're going to bring for that Roxanne. So Roxanne, what would you like to share with us today as you think about the body of work that you've done, all of your experience coaching, I'm sure hundreds, thousands of people? What can you tell us about the impact of the Enneagram, why it became so pivotal to what you do, and some of the results that you're getting?
Thank you, Jessica. So I'd first like to begin with an excerpt from the Deep Coaching book. It's called The Call to Coaching. As coaches, we have the unique opportunity to be with another human being who is engaged in the life-altering work of committing to and realizing his or her desires or their desires for a fulfilling life, and at a deeper level, to be free of unnecessary suffering. We do our best to show up so that our clients can do the same, meeting somewhere in the client's familiar inner territory, inner world, and traveling together to new territory that yields both remarkable possibilities and realities that at one time seemed but a distant dream. This is no small undertaking. So that's the first paragraph of the text of the first edition of the Deep Coaching book, using the Enneagram as a catalyst for profound change. And as I was preparing for this, I realized, that's a pretty good summary, actually, of putting it in a nutshell what deep coaching is about. So deep coaching is the frame of reference that I'm using today, and Jessica asked me to focus primarily on personal coaching and spiritual coaching. However, the principles that of this work can be used with clients who are interested in connecting their inner work, their inner life, to their outer lives, wherever they are. In my early coaching career, and that was in the late 90s, I recognized that most clients were coming with a few assumptions. They were coming to me with a few assumptions. First, there was something wrong with them. Whatever was getting in the way of realizing their dreams, of reaching their intentions and goals, whatever was getting in the way, that was considered bad. A second assumption is that they wanted to be fixed, or they wanted to fix somebody else. A third assumption is that they expected that change would come from someplace out there, any place but here. And without the benefit of the Enneagram at that point, I found that coaching seemed superficial and not nearly as satisfying as I had hoped. Actually, sometimes it was a little boring, and something was missing. So of course, most clients come because they want change or transformation, and coaching involves a process of change. But the question I was asking, a change in what, or a change in who? The questions that worked me further were, well, what are the premises upon which change via coaching are founded? What are the assumptions and the premises, the biases of change models in coaching? And another question was, well, what leads to sustainable and desirable change? With a follow-up question, well, do those changes and outcomes serve the ego, or do they serve a deeper self, one's deeper nature? And then, of course, I had to ask, well, what is my purpose in coaching? So this is all leading into the deep coaching process. During that time, I discovered the Enneagram Institute and the work of the belated Don Richard Riso and Russ Hudson. As I was going through those trainings, I began to realize why coaching seemed so superficial to me. When it came time for certification, I received permission to develop the beginnings of a coaching book using the Enneagram. And about 5 years later, the original edition of Deep Coaching was born. At the same time, I was exploring the deep movement, deep ecology, deep democracy, which is engaging those in the community who are often unseen, unheard, and activating their voices, bringing them into the conversation. Deep teaching, seeing one another more deeply in the learning environment. And that's taught beautifully by Parker Palmer. Deep space, the work of Joanna Macy in Deep Time, and her work Beings of Three Times. We're connecting with our ancestors, with future generations, with current time, and all the forces of current time that are available to us to help guide us. Deep listening, proposed by Thich Nhat Hanh, and depth psychology. To me, these were all signs of an awakening consciousness. So Jessica, you're asking about, well, deep. What is deep about deep coaching? And the follow-up work called Deep Living, which builds on those earlier principles. I find that my own understanding of deep continues to evolve, and I'm quite sure that I'll never know the full depth of deep because it's really based in deep presence. The iceberg model is just a starting point and a good place to start. What we see on the surface is what tends to get most people's attention: the content, the behavior, that which is visible. That's where much of attention goes. And simultaneously, we avoid the vastness of our nature. And simultaneously, we avoid the depth of our nature, what lies below the waterline, what is invisible to the naked eye. With clients, this way of presenting the structure of the 9 Enneagram types has proven to be most helpful. But in the big arc, deep coaching really refers to embracing the who and what that is showing up now, and simultaneously allowing for the experiences of the unknown, of what lies beyond the client's personality, what lies beyond the person's way of knowing themselves, of perceiving themselves. So here we have the sacred opportunity to be with the client in a sliver of the mystery of who this person is. I've come to think of deep coaching as a co-created trust walk. It takes courage on the part of the coach to be in the unknown. Wow. Not to be an expert on the other person. At the same time, clients are encouraged to develop enough trust in their coach, a trust in themselves, a trust in their journey, and in the unfolding process, a trust in that unfolding process, which is the unknown, to allow for change and transformation to take place. So the unknown is fundamental to deep coaching. And, we enter the unknown from the first moments that we're with the client. We don't know what the client is bringing forth in any particular session. So what can we do? Well, we can create the conditions to allow something to come forth. We can create a strong holding environment to create a sense of support and safety. We can offer a spaciousness that encourages groundedness, curiosity, compassion, non-judgment, truth, acceptance. That's a lot. And we can stay with ourselves, with our own 3 centers, with our own experience in this moment, paying attention to what's happening inside of us, because that will help inform what comes forth from us as coaches. Once a client has identified an intention for the session, we hold that as directional movement. And of course, that intention can change as the client is more present and more is revealed in the session. However, we don't know, as coaches, we don't know in advance what our questions or reflections back to the client will be. We don't know what will be asked of us. So by being present, the next question or the next response shows up. It takes courage to be in that space. Not perhaps assuming that the client is looking for certain things from us. And here we are in presence, and something else will show up. Listening deeply, sometimes to what is not being said, the client's journey to next action steps that weren't apparent at the beginning of this session are revealed to both of us and work through with both of us. This process never fails to amaze me because it is so counterintuitive to a linear focus or a kind of a mind-oriented focus. And it always leaves me in awe, and often leaves the client in awe. I sure wasn't expecting that. So rather than focusing on content, we shift our attention in deep coaching to what's here in the present and co-discover with the client what is ready to be said, to be released, or to be engaged. And then we loop that back to the original intention and see how that intention is informed, or the revised intention is informed. Whether as coaches or circle facilitators, there are foundational deep principles that I'd like to share. A few more. First of all, our basic assumption is that we have an innate, organic, evolutionary capacity and urge for evolution. We have a spiritual urge for evolution. The soul knows what it needs. So learn to listen to that. So one of the fundamental principles is coaching to direct experience. And this is directly related to the Enneagram. What is taking place in this present moment? And we call upon the 3 centers of intelligence. This requires the building of observational capacities and the ability to observe without getting attached to what we're observing, the capacity to observe without judging what we're observing, the capacity just to be with what is here. Noticing our sensations from our belly, noticing what is coming through in our heart, what is coming through mentally, stories or new insights, new intuitions, what's here. And so that development of the capacity to notice without judgment, notice without what is observed becoming another source of identification, that's really profound work, just that. It is what is in the here and now. It's completely counterintuitive to drop into the expansiveness of the moment and allow what's here to reveal itself, letting the process unfold. Sustainable change involves that observational capacity and the release of something long held as a hidden truth. A second principle, at its core, the deep experience or the deep orientation is based on a great allowing of our human experience. The light, the shadow, what we have accepted, aimed for, what we have rejected in the past. We have learned not to allow our experience, to push it away, to judge it, to dismiss it, just make it go away, ignore it. And what happens is we're pushing away a part of ourselves, and our clients are pushing away a part of themselves. There's a process of abandonment taking place. So when we abandon ourselves, or our clients abandon themselves, and put so much of their experience away, then that we can ask the question, well, who is here for the possibility of transformation? There's not much of one left if we push so much away. Numerous spiritual traditions have taught this approach, including, Diamond Heart, including Buddhism, and other spiritual traditions. So it's incorporating those principles into the work of coaching and transformation. A third principle is just be aware of the superego, the inner critic. It shows up everywhere, even for clients who appear strong and confident. And it is our relationship in great measure to the inner critic that determines its impact on us. It's our relationship to it that determines its impact on us. So being attuned to the many ways that the inner critic can show up in coaching is fundamental to the unfolding. When we engage it as a real voice, as the real thing, it shapes all of our responses. And it seems to have a way of magnetizing and magnifying itself when we are in the process of change and transformation. So as a coach, being attuned to the way that the inner critic is showing up for our clients, and it shows up differently for each client, based on Enneagram type, based upon what's happening right here and now in the field, and coaching to lessening the client's identification with it is vital. So the fourth principle loops back to what I was talking about earlier, and that is being on a trust walk. This is a journey of being on a trust walk. And in that trust walk, we are orienting to both healing the inner divide that is universal to the human experience, and shows up in personality patterns. And we are orienting to that which is beyond the hooked personality structure, the freer, more liberated, more expansive, truer dimensions of the client. Having the opportunity to mirror back that to our clients is sacred. So here we come into contact with the mystery of the person we are with. And that's another level of deep. Thank you.
Thank you, Roxanne, for unfolding for us and laying out the territory of the inner terrain of people who are coming for coaching, what we're encountering, the depth of it, and how the Enneagram, the understanding in a sense of the way the inner critic of the person being coached, or the way that they might be paying attention to certain domains and not others, is so informative and clarifying for shining a light into that deep place. And so I'm going to bring that inner territory over to Mario, who does a lot of work, certainly with individuals, but also is quite widely respected for his ability to work with organizations, business leaders, and teams, to talk a little bit about working with this territory of people and coaching in an environment where they're actually engaged in vocation. So Mario, over to you.
Great. Thank you, Jessica. So in order to understand where we are and why we think the way we do, I think it helps to understand one's background and history a little bit. So I'm going to take 30 seconds on my background here. I started professionally in publishing and ended up doing corporate communications work. In 1994, I was introduced to the Enneagram and fell in love with it, like so many people do. In 1997, I joined a small consulting firm to do executive coaching and team building, and immediately saw that the Enneagram could be a powerful tool in that kind of work. Also, however, saw that some of the language, given that the Enneagram came out of a psycho-spiritual background, didn't necessarily translate to the corporate environment that well. Not so much because people in businesses are afraid of spiritual language or anything like that, but there's this need for simplicity and directness and clarity that I felt was missing sometimes in some of the Enneagram literature. So I set out to try and create a way of talking about the Enneagram that worked in that environment, but also kept the depth and richness of the system. Okay. And so since then, I've been working with executives and organizations of all sizes all over the world. And I'm always happy to kind of share how I do this with people. So I always like to say that there are a few guiding principles that I like to keep in mind as I'm working with the Enneagram in organizations. Number one, it's important to remember what the role of the coach is, right? The coach is not a therapist. The coach is someone who is helps a client get from where they are to where they want to be. Okay. And that can be all sorts of different things. Sometimes it's a pure self-development engagement. Sometimes it is because they're struggling professionally and they need some skill development in particular areas. So the coach has to be sensitive to that and to understand that I have to go where the client wants, not necessarily where I think they should go. And so therefore the Enneagram needs to be a tool to support that rather than a roadmap for where we should take our clients, or where, at least in the organizational world, right? So for me, the Enneagram is just a tool for coaching. It shouldn't be the focus of the coaching, even though I use it all the time. It's really just a tool. It's almost incidental. My clients hire me to help them get results in organizations. In their work, they don't, they're not using me for a lot of self-development, self-exploration necessarily. Okay. So the Enneagram is a tool, but my philosophy to the work is what I call awareness, authenticity, and action. These are the three guiding principles that I follow when I'm working with someone. And I'm going to explain in a few minutes more what that means. I always like to remember that the Enneagram, or I think of the Enneagram as a problem resolution protocol. Okay. When your cable is not working, you call your cable company and you say, I have a problem. And the customer service person goes through a problem resolution protocol to diagnose the problem. And they start with the most immediate common issues. For example, they always tell you to reboot your system, right? Turn it off and turn it back on. Why? Because they know that that will help solve the problem 90% of the time. Well, the Enneagram works the same way. When something is going wrong in my world, knowing that I'm an Enneagram type 8 tells me the first place to look. Okay, look at issues related to 8ness. Okay, and if that's not it, then okay, I look for something else. But I know that 90% of the time, I'm just doing my 8 thing again. And that's what's causing friction in my world. Okay, so I always encourage my clients and people that I train to think of the Enneagram as a problem resolution protocol. It tells us where to go first, then where to go second, where to go third, et cetera. Okay. I also think it's important, again, that we see the Enneagram as a tool rather than a way of life, so to speak. There's a great saying in Zen Buddhism that, Zen is like soap. When you're dirty, you use it to rinse, to wash off the dirt, but then you rinse the soap off. You don't walk around all day covered in soap. And likewise, I don't think we should walk around all day covered in the Enneagram, right? Constantly referring to our type or, other people's type. It's something we use when there's a problem, okay? We pull it out, say, here's what's not working, and then we put it back on the shelf and go about our day, okay? Language is another issue. I think that we should try, and whoever we are working with in whatever environment, we should make sure that we are speaking their language. Okay. If I go to a different country, Spain, for example, or France, I don't expect people to immediately speak to me in English. I have to understand that They speak their own language. And if they speak English, great. But if not, it's up to me to speak to them in a language that they understand. And we need to do the same thing when we're teaching the Enneagram, is to understand that we have to speak the language of the people we're trying to communicate to. So language is very important when it comes to understanding and using the Enneagram. Now, it helps to think about kinds of engagements that we tend to work with before we go into how we use the Enneagram. Typically, the people I work with fall into one of three categories. First category is what I call the remedial category. Okay? Something's not working, something's broken, and it needs to be fixed. Right? This person's job is in jeopardy. Their relationships are in jeopardy if they don't make some changes. Okay, so I go in with that understanding that we have to find what's broken and we have to fix it. The second category of client is what I call a developmental client. These are usually high potential leaders in organizations who are being groomed for different, for larger roles. Okay, and so we take a different approach there. We help to kind of build a foundation for the person that they can build off of. The third category of client I have is what I call the existential client. This is a senior leader who's been very successful, but they need somebody to talk to. They need somebody who's objective. They need somebody who's outside the organization that they can be open with, that they can share their concerns with, and so forth. Okay, so we have to understand when we're working with a client, which of those categories do they fall into? Okay, and we will take a different approach to using the Enneagram in each one of those. As far as how I use the Enneagram, it needs to be simple. Okay, the Enneagram can be very complex and complicated if we let it be. I find that it's best to make things simple whenever possible, especially in a corporate environment. And frankly, that tends to suit my nature very well. I have a really short attention span. If there are more than 3 bullets on a PowerPoint presentation, I'm lost after the third one, right? 4 is too many for me. My wife sends me to the supermarket with a list. She knows there's only going to be 3 things in there, and then she's going to text me some more because she knows that I will lose attention if the list is too long. Well, a lot of corporate people have the same sort of mindset. So you try to keep things fairly simple when we can. So therefore, my approach to the Enneagram has 6 elements to it. 3 descriptive elements and 3 prescriptive elements. Okay? The descriptive elements are the 3 instinctual biases, what I call preserving, navigating, and transmitting, the 9 strategies, and then the 9 core qualities. And the core qualities are very similar to, the essential aspects that Sandra Matry and Almas write about in their books. Okay, so that's the approach I take to the Enneagram. What I find is that elements beyond that start to add complexity disproportionate to the utility that they bring. Right? There's all sorts of things about the Enneagram we could add, centers, this and that. But for me, it starts to get too complicated and it's not worth the degree of complexity it adds. Now, the prescriptive elements are working with what I call the awareness to action process. Okay. The second thing is what I call the 9 accelerators. These are practices related to each of the Enneagram points that I have found have been very useful for clients and organizations. And the third one is a set of 12 competencies that I work with my clients about. Those competencies fall into 3 groups. The first group is related to the 3 instinctual biases, and it has to do with how we can scale in organizations, meaning take on more responsibility. The second one has to do with leadership behaviors. The third has to do with leadership relationships. How do I interact with other people? And the fourth has to do with leadership thinking. What are the skills that a leader needs? And each one of these is mapped, like I said, to one of the Enneagram points. And when I am working with someone, I do a diagnosis of them. This is the awareness part, right? Figuring out, okay, what needs to happen? What changes do they need to make, either because they want to make them or a 360 assessment says, here's what we need to grow with. We need to look for the patterns, okay? This is where the Enneagram is so helpful, okay? How do the instinctual biases create obstacles for them? How do the 9 strategies create obstacles for them? How does the stunting of the core qualities create obstacles for them? And then we go through a process of rewriting narratives. Okay, this is the authenticity piece of the awareness to action process. We work with the strategies, with the instinctual biases, rather than against them, to create narratives that allow for new behaviors. Okay, because if we try to incorporate new behaviors without rewriting our inner narratives, it's like trying to transplant an organ into a recipient with the wrong blood type, right? It will reject the behavior. So we have to work with the narrative so that our way of using the Enneagram and thinking about the Enneagram is adaptive rather than maladaptive, okay? And then based on those skill set, we look at, okay, of these 12 competencies, which ones are we going to focus on? Or we might find that it's something else completely that doesn't quite map to the Enneagram, right? So this is basically the process we use. And when I work with a client, I start off with trying to understand their Enneagram type, their instinctual bias, their subtype, so I know which of these pieces to pull from the toolkit to apply to their specific situation to help them grow.
Mario, I am really appreciating this whole presentation, and 2 things I want to bring forward that just this deep gratitude for you speaking to. And the first is that it's about not wearing the Enneagram. You know, the Enneagram is supposed to be a tool for liberation and non-fixated ways of being. And I actually feel like we will be able to use it more deeply, to use Roxanne's word, and more efficiently, and more like in a way that actually frees us from our obstacles if we don't start to become identified with it. If it doesn't become like a new identity. The whole thing is to get us away from the fixation on identity. So I just really appreciated that. And I often say that there are many people that lead very amazing lives and got enlightened without knowing the Enneagram. But if the Enneagram is a useful, and it is, representation of how reality expresses itself, and it can open us to a larger reality than where we've been, then it's awesome, and it is awesome. So I really appreciated that. I also am appreciating that you have taken your coaching to a place where it's not about people coming and, you know, having time to like think about what they want in their life and go, but you're actually doing it in the workplace. It's like it's part of people's vocation, you know. So you're in action, as the name of your organization is, in the coaching. And I'm appreciating that you have found a sort of action-oriented way of supporting, I'm sure, these leaders and executives and other people in corporations, and actually having more awareness and depth to their work.
Thank you, Jessica.
And, you know, James, while I was listening to Roxanne and Mario, I was thinking, yeah, we're going to be talking to James. And James, your whole thing is really mostly in terms of coaching about training coaches. And I imagine that you train coaches to apply and take, you know, the work to many different places. Some who love to do the deep internal self-growth work, some who love to, you know, coach people in their activities, some who are coaching within spiritual organizations or churches, and some who are, you know, taking their coaching to service projects and social activism. And so I'm really looking forward to hearing that when you use the Enneagram as a part of your training of coaches, how is it helping to both bring the quality and integrity that you want of each of your coaches, and also allowing them to apply it in such a variety of settings?
Thank you, Jessica. That was a great orientation, and it was so fun to listen to Mario and Roxanne speak. I didn't know them before just what they said. So thank you for letting me be with them in this. So this whole approach that I've been doing, and a bunch of us have been doing since the late 80s, is called integral coaching. And the idea is to include everything about us, including if you like, the Enneagram notion of 3 centers, what we're thinking about and what we can understand and what we can plan, and what in our heart, what we can feel and what we can intuit, and the deep silence that can be there, and our body, and the genetic brilliance that we've picked up from all our ancestors that are in our body and that orient us to what's going on at a particular moment. Integrating all that, also integrating, as Roxanne talked about, the inside and outside of us, because for the longest time that seems separate, turns out not to be separate, of course, but also to integrate our relationships, integrate how we use equipment and technology, our relationship with nature. And there's probably 25 other things I could say that we integrate, but the notion is to have an orientation that's inclusive. And that's the main thing in being trained as a coach, as an integral coach, is to have the wherewithal to include everything. So like our friend Roxanne said, in a coaching session, we don't know what's going to happen with a person. We could just say, how are you today? Let's just settle here. Let's take a few deep breaths and arrive in. So how are you? And they might say, I just had the most horrible day. This or that happened. Or I just saw God and the heavens opened up. We don't know. So can we be there and accept all of it in a way that doesn't interfere with our client's process? So it's all well and good to just say be inclusive or allow, but if our internal process isn't coherent with that, we'll interfere even if we don't make a face or interrupt or make a gesture. So can we really let people be the way they are? So much easier said than done. So this is one of the reasons that we bring the Enneagram into the very first part of our training, in our first 4-day session. In fact, we have people take a test and start to read Russ and Don's book, The Wisdom of the Enneagram, before they get there. So they have some basic idea of their Enneagram type. So the exciting part is when each person comes in having a beginner notion of their type, and then hear the different types of everyone else. Because it sounds like should be a piece of obvious common sense that each person lives in a different world. But mostly what we think is everybody sees it and feels it the same way I do, but they grew up in Indiana, so they're a little different than me, or they grew up in China, so they're a little bit different than me. But basically we have the same orientation. Doesn't take much dipping our toe into or diving into the Enneagram world to understand that the universe of each person is quite different. What we pay attention to, what we value, how close we let people in, or how much of a distance we keep them, how much we're willing to be influenced or not by what goes on in the world. So this turns out to be a revelatory moment. And this is where we have to take Mario's advice well to heart, which is now we don't have the Enneagram as the tool that will open all locks, or any problem that I have, I just have to remember my Enneagram type. No, it isn't like that. It's that the Enneagram can do the first thing that I said, which is give us an appreciation of others. But here's maybe my favorite part of it. It shows us where our work is. I'm a type 5, and so I guess everybody on this listening to this will know about type 5. So I'm not going to do a teaching on type 5s, but Short version is, I thought that I knew everything I needed to know about myself and about what was important and how the world worked before I came to the Enneagram. And then I learned, oh my goodness, that's exactly the prison I'm in. I think I know everything. And what's important in life is something that I can know. And that started the path of opening my heart. So that happens to everybody who goes through the coach training. They find out, oh, I thought, or I felt, or I knew, or something, that this was all that was necessary, and I didn't have to include the rest. So the Enneagram shows where my work is. So for someone like me, being able to feel more in the heart and value that as much as an idea or conclusion that I might have, and coming into the body and being centered and present in the body and being in action, not just having an idea about something. So those are the first of a couple of ways the Enneagram is used in our training, is appreciating other people and seeing where my work is. But the foundation, even before all that or underneath all that, is people discovering what's most true about them is not their problem, or in Enneagram speak, not their fixation. So what's most true about, say, me isn't that I'm a person who tries to solve the world through thinking and figuring things out, or through our friend Jessica's type, who's so loving, but turns out there's some things beyond just loving everyone. Sometimes we have to take a different kind of action. But there's something deeper than our fixation. And in our world, it's very close to what's said in the Enneagram world. We call it an essential positive quality. That there's a whole variety of them that can be with us. The Enneagram is a really helpful arrow pointing to what they might be in a particular person's life. And we do our best in the training for people to not only hear it, but to feel it and encounter it. So when someone finds out that they are dedicated to everyone discovering their own brilliance and goodness, and they aren't just doing it to get ahead or to be liked themselves, it shifts their identity. My view about the Enneagram is it's a pathway to shifting our identity out of who we are convinced we are. Most of us are convinced I'm a product of what I've lived through, some combination of genetic material, some combination of psychological events happening inside of me, all of that. That's not truly who we are. So in the coach training, we use the Enneagram also as a path back to who people most truly, most fundamentally are. And something is really different and transformative and loving when we come into our coaching of other people from sitting in our own essential quality, instead of having to prove ourselves or make sure that by the end of the session there's some action plan the client can take. But coming in to the session already whole and complete and radiating from the deep goodness that each of us is. So those are the ways that we use the Enneagram in the class. Some people get so into it, they read the whole book, they go take other classes, and then they take it into their individual coaching work. But we use it in those kind of ways that are already outlined, and in a very compact amount of time, a lot can happen with people. That's what's fantastic about the Enneagram is people have been working on this for a whole long time, and really smart people have been working on it, so we can just plug into that and make it available to others. So that's what I would say in response to how do we use it?
Mm. And James, do you feel that once coaches have learned about their own type and they're willing to understand how their worldview, how their behaviors have been limited by that type, and when they learn about the type, what all the types are about, do you notice that things like, for instance, they're more creative and in their responses, to, because you've been in this field for a long
Right.
time, coaching. So do you feel like it actually brings people, coaches, a greater flexibility in their creative responses and also a greater attunement? Of course, we would expect that it would bring a greater attunement and compassion. But I'm wondering about the creativity and flexibility being increased by their own inner awareness and their awareness of other types.
Right. Yes. Yeah, that's a good point that you're bringing up, Jess, is that, yes, as we are more integrated ourselves, and to just pick the three centers, then we are more full in our response. And one of the things that people find out when they understand their type is they understand, oh, I'm always going to look in this very small container for what I could say or what I could bring, or how I could respond, or to use your word, how I could be creative in the session. But once I understand this variety that exists in other people, it opens up something in my own ability to generate some response or a path or a practice or something for someone else. Yeah. And we dip into, and you know this from your own work, we dip into a well that seems endlessly deep that we can draw on in responding to people.
Mm-hmm. And James, do you feel like, I'm curious because when I listen to you, I get the sense anyway that people that would go through this kind of coaching training approach, in some sense, would love to have a postgraduate possibility. So, I'm wondering, like, do you find that your coaches that certify that they come back to you, or they come back to be a part of the program, or because I just have the sense of a kind of endless depth, which of course Roxanne referred to. I'm wondering if there's a method that your program has for addressing that.
Yeah, there is endless depth, because all of us on this call that have ever worked with human beings know we have a sort of a way that works. And, oh, so it's going really great. And then along comes Fred, and we think, oh my goodness. And we have to develop something else within us. We have to open up some inner perception. We have to maybe talk to someone else to help us see a different way in. Yes, all of that. And then when I learn something, like, oh, I just went to an instincts workshop and now everybody has instincts. And I just pick an Enneagram example, then I'm more able. So there's that virtuous cycle of I develop myself, which makes me more able with clients, but then I hit a client, come up with something going on with the client that requires inner development of myself. Yes. So all the people, 80 or 90% of the people who go through our class understand that they're in development forever. And it isn't like, oh no, I have to take another class. It's, whoa, I can live more from my commitment to be of service to other people more fully and more skillfully.
Beautiful, James. And it kind of brings us full circle back to Roxanne and then to Mario, because I feel like you're describing that the training program, the Integral Coach training program that you're doing, it's sort of like what real education should be about. Are we teaching children how to learn, or are we teaching them a set of facts they should know? Real education would be to teach them how to learn. And you're saying that there's a way of training coaches that opens them up to this, regardless of they go into corporations the way Mario does, or they go into social activism coaching, the way some people do, it opens them up to this appreciation for the depth Roxanne was talking about, and a willingness to keep exploring and developing.
Yes, that's right.
Beautiful. Well, I wish we had more time to hear all kinds of stories from all of you about ways that people have had breakthroughs or developed, and how it's affected business culture, families, and coaching practices and individuals. But as we come here to the culminating part of our session, I'd just like to give each of you a minute to just speak whatever's on your heart and mind, having listened to one another and having all of this come together. So we will start with you, Roxanne. Just what's on your heart and mind that you'd like to share with the global community?
Wow, I feel like I've been in a master class, listening to Mario and James, and I'm so appreciative that we have been given the gift of the Enneagram to support us, support all those that we're serving, to do what they need to do to support their evolution, their reaching what's important for them, and that we have different ways because of doing that, because people need what will respond, in some ways to Mario, the need what Mario offers, and people are going to respond to James and what James and his school has to offer, and and Jess, to you as well, and to me, that people respond differently, they resonate differently. So I'm just so grateful, and I'm grateful that you've brought us together, and I've learned a lot from both of you, Mario and James. It's been a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you. And Roxanne, I had a similar feeling. As I've been listening, I thought, gosh, it would be so great to have like an Enneagram coaching, conference or summit, or, brain trust, heart storming together, because this is just golden.
It is. So
Mark.
thank you for starting it.
Yes, my pleasure and honor. Mario.
My response is similar to what Roxanne said, that I'm appreciating the expertise in both Roxanne and James and the diversity. This is what a good teacher does, is they understand the intersection between who they are and their natural gifts and the audience they're trying to reach and the goal they're trying to achieve, right? So when I listen to Roxanne and when I listen to James, they're clearly experts in finding that alignment and speaking exactly to that audience in just the right language. And one of the things I think, and I've said this before in our conversations, we need to appreciate and respect the diversity of approach to the Enneagram, right? And understand that if the Enneagram teaches us nothing else, it's that people are different. And they see the world in their own way, and they all bring their own gifts, and they all bring their own struggles and challenges. And the more we're able to listen to each other and say, I like that, that resonates with me, I respect that, but it's not my approach or style. The more we're able to do that, I think the more we all grow and learn.
Hear, hear. Thank you, Mario. And James.
So I'm happy to meet Roxanne and Mario. So thank you for being with me today. And Jessica, I want to thank you for your years of doing this, of bringing in people, enrolling them, enticing them with that smile of yours and the way you have of talking, where we know we're going to have a great time, and that you do everything you can to bring out the best of us. So thank you for doing that for all these years, and for just sitting in that seat and doing 1,560,000 of these. So thank you for doing that. And mostly what I come away with from talking to us is that there is goodness in the world, and there's lots of people doing good work. And I can be heartened and encouraged by that.
Well, thank you to the three of you, and thank you to all of the coaches in the world and the coaches that you are using the intelligence and wisdom and guidance of the Enneagram in your coaching. And as James says, I mean, really, here's to the goodness in all of us. May the coaching field, as it has been evolving, Roxanne talked about how shallow it felt so many years ago.
Right.
May it serve this essential goodness in all of us. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Jessica. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody.